we'd also, we need to remember that Christ is the perfect example of all of this, right? And so his ministry was 3 years long, but his whole life, as a carpenter, was he like carving crosses and giving them to people? Probably not. That would have been a weird time. But his whole reality would have been offered up to the Father as a prayer, and because he's Christ, he does everything perfectly, which means it's perfectly humble, right? So when people come to me and they say, "Yeah, I'm thinking about doing this thing or whatever," I'm like, "Great, do it, and do it as well as you possibly can." Because when you do that, they get, "Well, I'll be prideful about it." No, you won't. If it's actually done well, it'll be done in the image of Christ. It'll be perfectly humble. It'll be a great offering. And that's, like Father Chris said, I don't think it's not a problem. Like Christ doesn't call us to be bankers or artists or lawyers or housewives. He calls bankers and artists and lawyers and housewives to be disciples. That's what he calls. So whatever you do it as well as you possibly can. It'll be a good icon. And if it's bad art, it probably stems from bad theology. Get your theology corrected. It'll be all right.
This is Jonathan Pedro. Welcome to the Symbolic World. So hello, everybody. I am very pleased to be here with Father Christopher, Father James, and Father David, also known as the band Luxury. Some of you might have followed their story. Some of you might not know, but they started a band a long time ago when they were young, a rock band, and many events in their lives brought them ultimately to not all of the people in the band, but three who are here with us today to convert to Orthodoxy and ultimately to become priests. And there's a documentary about that called Parallel Love, which is a wonderful documentary. I recommend it to anyone, which kind of traces the story. So we're going to look into a little bit what their story is, the different, they put out an album a few years ago as well. They even did some live shows this summer, which they hadn't done in a while, and also their future projects. And we'll also talk about what it means to be an Orthodox Christian who is also involved in secular art. And so, fathers, thank you for coming to talk to me.
Thank you for having us here.
And so I'm hoping one of you can maybe just tell our audience just the basic story of how it is that I'm talking to three rock and roll priests here.
It's Father Chris's job.
Yeah, it's Father Chris's job.
I knew I was going to be conscripted for that. Well, the three of us, actually met in college back in the early 90s when all of us were very kind of interested in music and playing music. We met at this conservative Christian college, desperate to find like-minded musicians, and we wound up starting a band together. Played around kind of the Atlanta, Athens, southeastern scene for a number of years. Eventually, we got signed to Tooth and Nail Records after playing a festival up in Illinois. But around that same time, at least Father David and I were also studying church history with a group of friends that led us eventually into discovering the Eastern Orthodox faith. We wound up converting, much to Father James' chagrin at the time, but eventually Father James and his wife became Orthodox as well. But the band continued during that time. We were touring and playing quite a bit, and then as we started getting older and having children, the live aspect of the band waned. I eventually went off to seminary to pursue the priesthood, and then a number of years later, Father James, Father David did as well, and then got a phone call from Father David about 2013 saying, "Hey, man, I'm writing some more songs. You guys want to go in the studio?" So we did. And then around the same time, a friend of ours, Matt, who's also in the band but was a filmmaker, just thought it would be really interesting to do a story and a documentary on, the story of the band, the fact that three of us became Orthodox priests. This is the first album and writing and recording since being priest, and the documentary has done very well. Much to our surprise, we thought maybe 2 or 3 people would be interested in it, but NPR and other places were very interested. So it's been an interesting last few years as priests, trying to navigate being priests, but also playing rock and roll.
So you played some live concerts this summer. How was that? Do you wear your cassocks? No?
No, Father James, maybe you talk about that experience.
So yeah, it was last summer we played. I don't know what to say about it. I mean, we hadn't played in ages, and I guess the idea had come up that maybe we could try to do some shows, and wanting to promote the record a little bit. Even the record stretched out, trophies stretched out for ages before we actually got it released. And I can't remember how it all kind of came about, but we ended up being asked to play at a festival in Alabama, Furnace Fest, which is primarily like hardcore punk rock metal kind of thing, and we got asked to play, which was funny, but it was beautiful.
Did they reach out to you?
Yeah. Oh yeah. I think so. Is that correct? I think so. I think they came to us first. We weren't looking to play, and in the process of doing that, we thought, well, we probably ought to play another show before that to sort of warm up to that, and ended up playing a show at the Earl in Atlanta, which is kind of a cool club. We hadn't played there in many years, so we ended up playing in 2 shows, which was crazy. So we had these rehearsals, and I was pretty nervous about actually getting on stage again, but it ended up being a lot of fun. It was enjoyable. It's it's a diversion, but we ended up doing that last year, and I mean, I don't, not to it didn't prove we couldn't do it anymore. We proved that we still could do something, but we did it, and there it is. It's on video in places. So
Oh, it is. Can you find that video? We could find it.
Can't find it.
no, you can't find the video.
It's well hidden. Okay. All right. I would have liked to see that. And Father David, since you're singing, how was that for you in terms of a concert? Because that different energy.
Yeah, it was very different. Again, like Father Chris had said, we hadn't played together live in that setting for almost 20 years, and so it was a very different energy now, being a priest, and sort of what I felt comfortable doing, what I didn't feel. I felt very much self-conscious the whole time, so, which I didn't feel that early on, and so a lot of it might have been just around singing live, which is a difficult thing to do, and trying to be energetic and all that, but not so much the priest stuff. That wasn't the uncomfortable part. It was more of just not having done this in so long. So yeah.
And also I imagine being older and just being more aware of certain things in terms of.
Yeah, you still want to be like exciting and interesting and provocative and all that. And there is somewhere in the back of your head the idea of priesthood and your congregation and all of that, who weren't there, thank God. That would be even stranger, because it's a different reality. But no, I mean, it's just, you get older and you want to be age appropriate, that kind of thing. I think, I don't know. It was odd,
And what age were the people in the audience? That's probably, was it a bunch of 20-year-olds? Like, was it a bunch of teenagers, or was it more kind of adult?
It definitely was more people. I mean, we're all over 50 now, and so it was definitely more of our
dad rock crowd.
But it was loud. We played hard and heavy and loud, and it was great. I don't really want to do it again, but yeah, it was a good experience. So.
I mean, I think that's interesting. You're saying you don't want why don't you want to do it again?
It doesn't do anything for me in particular at this point. Like my own interest is in songwriting and making records, that kind of thing. That's where I get the most joy and interest out of that. the playing live thing, I suppose if we did it more often, I would feel I could get my way into it a little bit more, but it's not. I don't really have any interest in that. So, but I don't even go to shows anymore. So I just don't have a lot of experience, interest in that kind of thing. So,
but still an interesting in the music part. Like it's not disillusioned with the music. It's just the live thing is not the right.
Yeah, I mean the arc of making music and putting out music, and then the live part of that. Like my interest ends once the record, when I'm holding it in my hand. That's where I've finished my job, and anything beyond that, I don't have any interest in at all. So,
Father James, Father Christopher, what about you in terms of the live experience? Did you have a similar experience?
I had a lot more fun than I thought I would. I had the same kind of hesitation. You're a priest, but like a lot of things, some priests, they go out and they play golf, I guess, or they, I don't know, what's something analogous? They go fishing or hiking, or
people don't watch you though. People don't watch you.
Yeah, well, yeah, yeah. This is different. But it's like, I don't know. I mean, that I enjoyed it a lot, but I'm with my brother. I'm kind of, it's fun. I mean, it's fun. I like to get together with the band. I enjoy that part. And if people want to watch us getting together, I mean, we have a lot of fun. We tell jokes and we sit around. We could do that. We could just have a rehearsal. They could just all watch us sitting there eating a meal and then making jokes and playing for 5 minutes and then correcting, that if we could do that, that would be more fun. But maybe that's a concept. Maybe we could
terrible idea.
Terrible idea.
Its time has come. I don't know.
Well,
what about you, Father Christopher?
Yeah, I mean, I enjoyed it, and I'm open to doing it again. But it was certainly there was tension. I mean, just how do we do this? Like, we're performing in front of people. It's but we're priests, and we're not. I don't know. It just the tension of all of that. I think at some point I just said, okay, well, I guess just embrace the tension of it, and just kind of remember who we are. So, I'm not opposed to doing it again, but, I realized kind of what Father David said. I mean, it didn't really do anything for me in terms of like, oh, we got to do this more often. It was fun. It just felt like kind of nostalgia, especially the show in Atlanta, being able to see a bunch of friends of ours. That's where we used to play all of the time. So it just felt like a reunion of sorts. And so many of our extended clan down there, many of them have also become Orthodox over the years. So that was just pretty neat to see some of them. And yeah.
So this is something, I mean, we've had conversations before. I think maybe, I don't know if I've had this conversation with all three of you, for sure two of you, for sure Father Christopher and Father David. So even in the things you're saying, I feel a little like there's an uneasiness in the way that you express your relationship to the music, like now to the concert. I don't know if it's uneasiness or at least a sense in which you're not sure how to place your feet. Maybe that's the best way to understand, like, how do I position myself? And so I know that there's a lot of people watching this, a lot of people who are in the secular art world, people who do animation, video games, that watch my content, people who reach out to me, and many people feel that uneasiness, you could say, not sure how it is do I live these two lives. And so I was wondering if it's something that you're, let's say, exploring on your own. Do you see a connection? Is there a connection between your Orthodox faith and the music, or do you feel like it really is just two lines running next to each other?
Well, I mean, I think a lot about that. I think the band's sort of prime experience was pre-internet days. Right? So there was an aspect of it where that was very segmented. Like, this was what you do. You can get up on stage. Nobody really knows anything about you. It's a persona that you sort of adopt. And there's a kind of comfort in that, where you can just simply, you can be that thing in that setting. And there's nobody's taking cell phone videos of your playing. There's nothing that's suddenly this becomes a permanent sort of reality, right? And you can kind of create that and take some sort of comfort in creating that persona and entering into it. Nowadays, it's they know who you are, they know your wives' names, they know they've seen pictures of your kids, they see your Facebook page, your Instagram, and all these different things. Like it's all just jammed together. And that's, I think, where the discomfort comes is how am I a priest when I'm playing music? Well, people know you're a priest because they've seen your stuff, right? Or am I a musician when I'm a priest? That's the other, we feel the same sort of tension in church, So I think we live in an age which is way too overexposed with all of our realities, right? And so my own discomfort is about, how much do I want people to know about me, and the reason I don't have a, sort of YouTube, no offense, a YouTube channel, these different things, like I just don't want that much sort of exposure. I want to be somewhat mysterious still, right? So that I can keep some, for me personally, I can keep some bifurcated realities in my life, I think, a little bit. I don't know if that makes sense or not, but it's just a different age we live in, and your musicians nowadays sort of, I think they have to have everything out there all the time for everybody. And I think that's I don't know. So.
Yeah, I think the flip side of that, I mean, we've talked a lot about this kind of amongst the band. And I mean, Father David, you always make that point that, parallel lines don't intersect. And so this idea of, but, I think there is this sense that we have always struggled as a band, trying to understand how does our Christian faith kind of inform our art and vice versa. And, we never set out to be a Christian band or, have this agenda to win souls or whatever. We were just, trying to create art. But, I think, and I mentioned this in the movie, this idea, like Father Alexander Schmemann talks a little bit about in his book For the Life of the World, about this vocation of being a priest of creation who takes the matter of this world and offers it up to God with thanksgiving and praise, and then it gets returned to us as something life-giving. I know for me, in my journey into Orthodoxy, while being in a band at the same time, that was so helpful for me, I think, to just think of art that way, that we're somehow offering up the matter, just like bread and wine. Eucharistically, we're offering up the matter of our talent, and hopefully God blesses it and we can create something beautiful, and it reflects our life and our worldview. So I think that's been helpful, I think, for us as a band to think about it that way also.
So I
would say about that, though, like, we wouldn't do this in the church, like,
yeah, well, I think that's really where, in some ways, it becomes fascinating for me, or to think about, because and I think that's probably why people are so fascinated by your story as well, because if you were Protestant pastors, you could probably do it in the church, right? You would be using it as worship music or whatever. You could do that and you could get away with it, right? You could have the concert in the church and get away with it. But for sure, everybody knows that you couldn't do this in church. Like, you couldn't use that. It's not a strictly liturgical action in the strict sense. But at the same time, as
music.
Right, but at the same time, like in the words of Father Alexander Schmemann that you mentioned, and I think just in general, in terms of St. Maximus and the way that we understand Christ's presence in the world, we have a sense in which liturgical, the form of the liturgy, or what the liturgy does, can be applied at smaller levels, right? I often talk about how a family meal is somewhat liturgical. It's not strictly liturgical, but it's somewhat liturgical because it's binding together around a common thing. There's a type of dance that happens in a family meal that is ritualized. And I think there's the same thing with the concert, but I'm trying to see, Father Christopher, like, what is it that it's expressing, right? Let's say, what positive thing, even if we think in terms of Orthodox mindset, what positive thing does rock and roll manifest? Like, what could it manifest that's positive? And this is like a really, like, this is not a trick question. It's not I'm really trying to, I myself am trying to kind of see this. I have kind of an idea, but I'd like to hear your thought about it.
Yeah, I mean, I'll say a few things, but you guys can jump in as well. I just know when I first heard your talk on the Pentecost for the zombie apocalypse, and you talked about this idea of kind of like a narthex art, or kind of, I can't remember how you term it, but it's kind of like, it's not quite in the church, but it's somehow reflecting something of reality. It's entering into even kind of the depths of the human experience. And I mean, I'm a bass player, so I mean, my bass parts are entering. But when I think of, like Father David and his themes, in his lyrics, I mean, I think there's definitely a depth there. Maybe in the same way that like folk music is in Eastern European countries. Like, these aren't songs that we would hear in the liturgy, but they're definitely, reflecting on a lived experience for those producing it.
I want to hear someone else's ideas on this. I know, Father David, it's something that racks like really kind of rattles in you. So I want to hear what you think.
Well, I mean, honestly, it's never been too much of a tension for me. As far, I've never thought that I needed to write songs or lyrics that directly correspond to sort of my life as a Christian, as a priest, or anything like that. All of my life in the church, my life as a priest, it all has tremendous impact on how I write songs, in the sense of, it's flavored with these ideas of the rhythms of the liturgical life and the imagery of that, and the questions that I ask. But it's just, I never felt compelled to turn that into something that's sort of explicit. So I guess there's not a lot of, maybe in fact, I probably try to avoid it more than anything. I think, recently I wrote a song over the last couple of years that actually has the name Jesus in it, which is the first time I've ever done that. But it's, somebody had written it in graffiti on a wall, right? That's sort of that's how I brought it into that. And that seems natural to me, as opposed to the private thing that we do as Christians, the privacy of worship and all that kind of thing.
Yeah,
I wouldn't use that in rock music.
Well, this is why it's so fascinating in some ways, because you have a sense of what is truly sacred and holy and highest, you could say. It almost does the opposite as what, like I said, a kind of evangelical would do, because the kind of evangelical thinking would be like, yeah, put Jesus in there as much as possible, just throw him in. And so in some sense, it's particular because you recognize the value or a certain hierarchy where it's like, I know what I'm doing is not in the same space as when, I'm consecrating the Eucharist, right? It's just not in the same space. And so I don't want to confuse that hierarchy by let's say, almost saying, like you said, I feel in what you're saying, it's like, if I brought Jesus into my songs all the time, it would come on almost be like blaspheming, like maybe not blaspheming, but it would be like a demeaning to what the highest part of that is.
It's, our songs are not sacred space.
Yeah.
So to do something, to bring something into that, like, and I've said this before in other places, but I don't typically talk about things that I really love. I keep those things for myself. They're private, the things musically, the things I really love. I don't want to talk to other fans of the bands that I like, because you can't possibly love them the way I do, kind of thing. And so I think in some ways, I'm terrible as far as being evangelical, because I don't really want to talk about Christ to people. It sounds weird as a priest to say that, but like, I don't, I want to, or even the Theotokos, like that, good example. Like, I don't want to talk about her to other people, unless we share it in a communal kind of space, a sacred space, the space of the church, or in that setting. In a band, it seems like the worst possible idea to bring that into that setting, to me anyway. I'm sure you got comments.
Someone else on this question?
It's funny because every time this comes up, I think I'm becoming more convinced. Like I have answers, and I'm like, I don't have any clue how to answer the question or how to untie the knot. And that kind of occurred to me more recently. Like, how do you even answer this? It's, I almost wonder what the question is anymore. What do we do with it? I mean, I got guitars on the wall, and I'm in my cassock. So it's sort of like Father Chris said, there's that tension. Maybe in some ways, as a priest, the rock and roll part of our life is like dinner on the dining room table versus, offering, and this may not be the best way to put it, but offering the Eucharist on the holy table. The two are connected. Who is it though? I think it was Father Thomas Hopko would talk about the connection between, the fellowship meal you share at coffee hour, or the common meal after liturgy, versus the Eucharist. They're not opposed; they're connected. But there's a very clear difference. And the things that we might do and say around the meal that we have at the common meal after liturgy, hopefully will reflect what we've done in the Eucharist and won't contradict it. But maybe it won't be as ritualized. It won't be as it'll be sacred, but sacred as an informed sacred. Reshaped by the true thing, the real thing. And that meal that meal being an image of the greater meal, marriage being an image of the true marriage, whatever it might be. And rock and roll is an uneasy fit. And yet it's like there's this compulsion, when you've done it for all these years, to keep. I mean, I'm surrounded by it here. When I went to seminary, it was funny. Like, this first time I ever did this, because I was much worse about taking other people's gear than I was giving it up. But people left it around. There's like this rule that if you leave your gear sitting for so many minutes, it's mine. We used to have in the movie. What that? It's stealing. It's stealing. Yes, but let's call it. Let's gloss it here. In the movie, we talked about the dish, which was this all ages club that we ran. And it's a great story that I won't get into. But people would leave their gear occasionally, and they wouldn't go back and get it. Well, it became ours. When I went to seminary, the first time in my life, I gave away gear. I'm not going to need this anymore. I'm going to seminary. I'm going to be a priest. I still have some regrets about that, because I thought, now I probably own more gear than I've ever owned in my life, as a priest. You give up these things, you think it's going to become less a part of you, but yet you're, still a part of who you are. But I think for myself, I'm more concerned that will the stuff or the music somehow misshape the priesthood. That's my primary concern. Like, I'll be a priest, and I'll be a priest who picks up a guitar and wears my street clothes to play a show once in a blue moon, maybe. But if that harms any of this stuff in any way, then I need to put that away. So there's that tension of is it crossing a line? Is it doing something else? But like I said, I don't even know if that's an answer. I guess for myself, I just keep making music, and that's the best I can do at this point.
So maybe that's the next question, in terms of, we won't name any names, but I mean, has that happened? Have you felt like you've received criticism, or that people have questioned, your priesthood, or questioned the fact that you're pastors of churches because of this?
I'll say first, since I brought it up, I've not had that, actually. I kind of feel like people should. I mean,
I feel the same way.
Yeah. I feel like when I became a priest, immediately I let people know, because of the internet. I'm like, look, guys, you're gonna get to know me. You're gonna go on YouTube. You're gonna see videos. Here's some of my past history. Don't be shocked by this. And my folks have always been just like, they think it's super cool, and I'm kind of like, maybe you shouldn't. I don't know. Maybe it's not bad. I don't know.
You get put into a category. You become the cool priest.
Yeah. Exactly.
You have the love
feels equally as uncomfortable.
Yeah. Totally.
Well, it's funny. I mean, my funny story about this is, the movie was hitting all of these art house cinemas around the country. So it was coming to the local cinema here. And I was just nervous to talk about it to my parishioners. I mean, people know about the band and all of that. Finally, somebody pulled me aside and said, Father, you need to announce that this is coming, because I think people would be disappointed if they know that it came and you didn't tell anybody. So the very first time I've ever mentioned the band, like from the AMBO or whatever, it was like announcements after liturgy. And I just said, well, some of you know that I'm in this band, and everybody just started laughing because like everybody knows that. But I've never acknowledged it like publicly. I said, well, this movie's coming. Some of you might be interested. And I don't know, the place was sold out, and most of the people that were there were my parishioners.
Yeah.
So the Q&A afterwards, it was just,
Is that weird?
It just felt so awkward, but it's somehow integrating at the same time.
So maybe Father David, this is a question for you in some ways. I mean, maybe for all of you, because in some ways I can see like the trying to figure out how it connects, hoping maybe that it connects somehow. But have you seen a difference in, for example, the themes, either musically or in terms of lyrics, that as you've matured in your own lives, in your own spiritual lives, in your own priesthood, have you noticed that there has been a change in the type of themes that you're addressing, or even just the depth of what you feel like you're able to touch in terms of themes?
Yeah, well, I mean, definitely things have changed. But like right now I'm working on just a very short little EP that I hope to release before the end of the year. It's just home recordings, and Father James and Father Chris are going to help me with it. But like one of the titles of one of the songs is "My Eyes Are Up Here," which is typically referring to, a woman with her features, and you're looking at her features as opposed to her face. So I love that phrase, and I'm converting that into a more something to do with like spiritual versus carnal kind of language. I'm using it in a different way. So in that sense, yeah, like I like to use provocative themes and ideas, even language. But I think pretty much for the entirety of the band, almost, I've been living an Orthodox lifestyle. So like I've always sort of tackled some of these themes with an Orthodox sort of mindset. So as I've gotten to be, been a priest the last, 10 years now, there are definitely certain things I won't say because it's too far. It goes beyond beyond the pale sort of thing. But I still like to push and provoke. So, but yeah.
What do you hope that does? Like, what is that?
Just mess with people. I mean, just, I don't know. I don't like my interaction with music is all about, it's just personal. It's like, first of all, and I've said this in the movie, I don't believe anybody really likes the music that we do, even if they tell me they do. Like, I don't really believe that, first of all, and I don't care ultimately. It's really about the formation, the creation of something that wasn't there, that is now there, which is why once it's done and it goes out into the world, I don't pay any attention to it. Try not to reviews. I don't really care about playing live and all that kind of thing. I really like about the creation of it. And so that's where all my attention is. And if I have any tension, it's during that process of saying, well, can I say this? Is this too far? Is this too complicated? One of my solo records, I used the F word in one of my solo records a number of years ago, and but it's very appropriate in the usage of it, and it's I like to use language in that way as a provocative kind of thing, or these images that are provocative. I don't know what the end goal is with that. I mean, I really don't know. It's what you do. It's rock and roll, right? So
yeah. So I think that the way that I've been seeing it, or trying to kind of understand what rock and roll could be, because obviously it does from the very beginning, right? It's very associated with sensuality, also emotion and anger, all these things kind of coming together. So it's a passionate thing. It's a very passionate thing. And so I was trying for a while to think about what, like, in terms of thinking of the idea of Christ filling all things, right? The idea of Christ kind of participating in all, like, what role could it be? And I had this image of St. John the Foreigner. Like, that's the image I had. Like, there's something about being in the desert, like I can imagine St. John the Foreigner in like a heavy metal band, right? He's out in the desert, he's like screaming, he's telling people to repent. It's like, it's more of that kind of get with it, folks, why aren't you seeing this? Like, are you and I know like that's not actually the exactly the space of your band, but this is like the image that I had, that I thought, like, in terms of thinking of this idea of art of the narthex, or art of the art of the desert, something like that, something about that. Anyway, so that was the thing that I could kind of see in my mind, and the aesthetics of rock and roll seemed to fit even with that to a certain extent.
I think for me as the lyricist, like I have always used the method of asking the question as my primary way of writing, and maybe that's the way the prophets would do it. It was more of like, look at what you're doing, look at this reality. And it's not that, I try not to give the answer so much, and they talk about that in the movie a little bit. Like, I'm not trying to hit people over the head with answers, but it's just more of a look at what's going on, look at this reality, look at what's happening. And then beyond that, the church has the answers. If people want to come and find the answers, this is where you find it. Maybe our role, as musicians, is to ask the questions. And maybe
I think that's a great formulation, and it is in some ways a formulation of, it's like, you could say something like, as we stand in chaos, let's say, or we stand outside of the church, then what does that mean? And that's it. It's the question. Like, it's like, what about this, Lord? Like, what about this? That's the role of the outside to a certain extent, So I think that you hit the nail on the head there.
All good music kind of does that, right? I mean, whether it's made by Christians or not, that's what, protest music was, whether it involved a acoustic guitar or not, it was all by asking the question, look at what's going on.
So who would you say are your influences in terms of music and in terms of writing?
Me?
You start, brother.
I don't like anybody. I mean, I like very few things. I was listening, so again, I'm working on this new project that all I listen to anymore these days really is just Nils Fromm. I don't know if you know who that is or not, but he's just a composer, all instrumental music. And I find that the stuff that I'm writing is just basically trying to duplicate what he does with vocals. Historically, obviously, some of the influences are pretty obvious. I mean, I was a huge Smiths fan back in the day, and I think Morrissey lyrically was the most clever and most interesting. I was also a big House Martins fan. I think Paul Heaton and his writing was very interesting. Outside of music, I always reference T.S. Eliot. I come back to him all the time, quite often. And you can't get far in this day and age without referencing Radiohead in some way, either thematically or sonically. I think the songwriting especially is just super interesting. Those are some of my, lyrically and musically, being the songwriter, that's where I'm kind of coming from. Father Chris and Father James have their other textures they add to that.
What about you, Father James, Father Christopher?
At one time I was really into U2. I think they're kind of boring now, but I loved them when I was in high school, and that got me into the sound, like the sound of things, the atmospheric quality of things. But then my brother and Father Chris got to college, and Father Chris introduced us to like the DC punk scene. So Washington DC had this punk scene, and there was just this energy, this vitality to that was totally different than a lot of the, like, I was hugely into like the new wave movement and the 80s. I love that stuff, and synthesizer and stuff. I still love it. I write that kind of stuff, but the punk scene, particularly things, bands like Fugazi, or I loved a band called Shudder to Think. They just were poetically bizarre, and the lyrics were impressionistic and made very little sense, but it was just really, really beautiful in terms of the way the guy wrote, and it was very influential on me in terms of guitar playing, because the early records was really scattered and kind of interesting, but then like the way the singer Craig sang, and just bizarre lyrics were in a good way, just kind of influenced kind of how I thought about writing guitars because, my brother writes, he probably, at the time we started, I was writing a lot. I guess I was writing a lot of music. As a band we were, but I was writing a lot of music still. But then he learned how to play the guitar, and he plays better than I do. So he started writing stuff. But then he uses these weird chords, like a seventh. What's a what's a C major seventh? I don't know what that is. I play power chords. So I have to learn. I was challenging kind of the way, and I still do, I think, the melody, so it kind of influenced how I was doing things.
Just play my chords. That's all you got.
It's not gonna happen. I mean, it just won't work. I can't do that. I'm not doing it. Rebel. So that's what I did. What I do.
Yeah, and as they said, I mean, I was very influenced by kind of the underground punk scene of the 80s and early 90s. And I would say I was more influenced kind of ideologically in some respects of just kind of this do-it-yourself, we're going to start our own band, start our own venue, and then music was all just a part of that, using music as a means for just making change. So certainly Fugazi and all of those bands, I think musically, I just loved the energy and as a bass player, just the almost like jazz influenced a little bit. And then certainly I got into jazz as well, but yeah, Radiohead, and certainly I loved U2, and I always loved Adam Clayton's bass playing, and yeah.
Which is funny because we don't sound anything like that, I don't think.
Oh.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I think, when I listened to the early albums, it really did sound like the 90s in its own way. It had its own sound, but it still had that that vibe. I don't know how else to describe it. So what about now? Because you're working on an album now. How do you feel how that's going? How different is it? How similar is it to what you've done before?
That's your job, brother.
Yeah. Oh, it's so hard. It's so hard nowadays. I wrote a bunch of songs over the last few years, and we've gotten together a number of times to try to sort of work them out to see how we would put them together, and it just didn't work repeatedly. It ended up sounding just not interesting, and so probably not bad, but just not interesting. And so I kind of went back to the drawing board and just took all the songs and just re-demoed them in a totally different fashion, using a lot of keyboards and arpeggiators and things like that. And I said, okay, let's just try to record them, let us do it this way. And it seems like it's kind of worked a lot better. It's very much less democratic, less band-like. And Father Chris will tell you, as he's recording his bass part, I'm standing over him going, no, don't do it that way. Change that. And the drummer the same way. I was sitting right in front of his kick drum, and I'm like, no, that's a bad fill. Do it this way. Not that I play drums or anything like that.
A benevolent dictator.
Yeah, and then my brother putting down guitars, he'd spend 10 hours working on something. I don't like that. Try something else. So
you're the dictator of this project right now. You've become
it's going to be, good or bad, it's going to be sort of my vision for things. And so
we have a hierarchy within the band.
Right. I think, for me, I'm just not interested in repeating the stuff we've done in the past. And so I think the new stuff it's weird. It's different from us in the sense of there's a lot of dancey stuff going on, which is, we're not a dancey band. But there's it's just going to be different, I think, which again, in terms of songwriting, that's what's interesting to me, just not repeating the same thing. So.
All right. So
go ahead.
I was going to say, I was kind of bring it to my last question, which might be in some ways hard considering the discussion that we've had already. But so, like I said, I know there's a lot of artists that watch my content, a lot of people who many of them are post-secular. The best way to explain it, they kind of come out, they're actually went very much into a secular world, into the secular art world, but then became disillusioned, and now are, let's say, Christian adjacent, or actually going to church or a catechumen somewhere or whatever, people kind of floating around, and everybody's trying to figure out how to do this, right? How to live their lives in a fulfilling way, especially because a lot of them are professional, they do it as a living, how to live their artistic lives. and also, move towards Christ. And so do you have something to advise these people? Like, is there something what would you say if someone like came to you in your own parish and had those questions,
Can I jump in? Is that all right?
Yeah.
Again, I feel like I want to say this quickly because it's like I feel like I don't have the answer anymore, which is kind of good. But I keep thinking about before I went to seminary, I was a furniture builder, and how much when I became Orthodox in the midst of that, like in that period of my life, the furniture was still the furniture, but something had changed. Like I was realizing like how much that can become, I mean, you're an icon carver, so you understand. An iconographer often knows, that should be an act filled with prayer, but suddenly whatever you're going to do, whether it's, building furniture for a living or making art, which in my mind, in a lot of ways there's a lot of connection there. I mean, it's something that has to be filled with prayer. I mean, I don't know how everything, our whole life is supposed to be filled with prayer. If you're an Orthodox Christian and you want to do things, I feel like I'm kind of skirting the question. You want things to be good in terms of your output. You're a musician. You're trying to square orthodoxy in a sense with rock and roll or whatever it might be. I mean, all you can do is offer it. It's either it's blessable or it isn't. And for myself, it's always been, like we said before, it's been a tension. I didn't know what to do with it. I still kind of don't know what to do with it, except for the fact that it's sort of like it's the natural thing to do. I admit I will be probably a musician who makes on my own, rather mediocre music until I die. It's a natural output of me. Whether it's something that's totally eternal or not, I don't know. The best I can do is say, here it is, and then offer it in a sense with a prayer, praying that it's something that's worthy and that God can somehow make use of it. Maybe I read a story. Maybe some of you read the book Scent of Holiness. It just comes to my mind that in this book, and I don't know how good or bad this is, but in this book, there's a tale of a monk, and I think I've seen other places, who comes to the monastery, and he's this goofy guy. He doesn't really have anything to offer the monastery, and another monk sees him one night doing like gymnastic tricks in the church. And at the end of it, he falls down before the icon of Christ, and he just says, "I'm sorry, Christ, this is all I got. I'm no good at anything else. But I was a clown before I became a monk, and this is what I've got to give you." And of course, the other monk is scandalized. And as the story goes, he brings another monk in, and they spy on him doing these gymnastic tricks in the church at night when no one's there. And they're there to basically kind of clamp down on him, except for the fact at the end of this one particular evening, he falls in for the icon of Christ. Christ himself appears and wipes the sweat from his brow and says, "Thank you for your offering." And the other two monks are shattered by this, like, wow, okay, this is bizarre, but this is what Christ has chosen to do for this. Now, whether this is true or not, I don't know. But for me, when I hear that story, I think, okay, well, maybe that's it right there. Maybe there's something to be said for that. Does that help people? I don't know. But I mean, for myself, there's that tension, and maybe I'm a clown, maybe that's all I can do is jump around. I don't know. Again, I don't think I've got the answer, but that's what comes to me when we talk about these things, for what it's worth. Is that too weird? I mean, I don't know.
It's what it is. I mean,
This is what it is. I don't know.
I've kind of come to the same place that, I don't know if it's something to figure out.
Yeah.
Other than just, kind of embrace the tension of it. And you're wanting to bring your Christ into every area of your life. And so, we don't have this dichotomy or these little like segregated parts of our life as Orthodox Christians. It's all one life. And so we just want to offer up all of our life, whether we're in church, whether we're at our job, whether we're in the recording studio. It's kind of, I think it's Abba Moses. I can't remember which Desert Father is, but, talks about stay in your cell and it will teach you everything. Mm-hmm. And so I think kind of our cell is just whatever we've been given, whatever our obedience is, whether it's our job, it's the talents we've been given, whether one is a priest, icon carver, and just, I guess, just seek to bring that presence of God into the midst of everything that we do. I don't know.
We'd also, we need to remember that Christ is the perfect example of all of this, right? And so his ministry was 3 years long, but his whole life, as a carpenter, was he like carving crosses and giving them to people? Probably not. That would have been a weird time. But his whole reality would have been offered up to the Father as a prayer. And because he's Christ, he does everything perfectly, which means it's perfectly humble, right? So when people come to me and they say, "Yeah, I'm thinking about doing this thing," or whatever, I'm like, "Great, do it, and do it as well as you possibly can." Because when you do that, they get, "Well, I'll be prideful about it." No, you won't. If it's actually done well, it'll be done in the image of Christ. It'll be perfectly humble. It'll be a great offering. And that's, like Father Chris said, I don't think there's necessarily, it's not a problem. Like Christ doesn't call us to be bankers or artists or lawyers or housewives. He calls bankers and artists and lawyers and housewives to be disciples. That's what he calls. So whatever you do, do it as well as you possibly can. It'll be a good icon. And if it's bad art, it probably stems from bad theology. Get your theology corrected. It'll be all right.
I remember at one point, after becoming Orthodox, I'd been Orthodox for a couple of years, and I've been in a number of bands, but a couple of bands. And the other band I was in, other than Luxury, which was a band called They Sing As They Slew, we were playing shows, and we were playing shows, a lot of shows on Saturday nights. And I was feeling really conflicted with this. And so I would go to Vespers, and we'd leave there and we go drive, not terribly far away, and play a show. One night I was playing at some actually nearby place. So I was talking to the priest to our priest, Father Jacob, after service. And I just said, I'm like, I got to go play the show. It's in this dingy little club. And so I just feel so weird about it coming to Vespers. And he said, well, like my brother said, he said, do good, just do it well, play well, offer it well. And that actually really put my mind at ease. In fact, we played really well that night because I went with sort of a piece, and I didn't feel like I had to make this an Orthodox event for the people. I just simply took what I had at Vespers, went, picked up my guitar, and played a show and tried to offer it to the Lord. And that's what we did.
Holy Spirit was really moving that night.
Really.
All right. Well, Father David, Father James, Father Christopher, thank you so much for your time. And definitely let me know when the next album comes out. I'll really want to listen to it. And everybody, I think, is it streaming somewhere? Where can people find the documentary?
Yeah, it's streaming on, I don't know, Apple TV, on Amazon.
On Prime?
All right. Okay.
Yeah,
Prime.
a few other places.
All right. It's called Parallel Loves, right?
Yep.
So everybody look it up, and then you can on Spotify check out Luxury. I have them on my playlist. So thanks for your time.
Absolutely.
Thanks, Jonathan. Appreciate it.